Good morning, everyone. My name is Ginger Healy, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about creating trauma-informed educational environments. And I really want to apologize about not being with you in person. I have an unforeseen medical emergency and am headed into surgery and wanted to hurry and record this so that you had the information that you needed. But I apologize for not being there in person. I was really looking forward to that. So I hope that this webinar gives you the information that you seek. And please know you can see my email on the screen, that you are more than welcome to email me anytime and ask me questions, and we can further your education and I can support you in this trauma-informed journey that you're entering upon. So just a really quick introduction. I am an LCSW therapist and have been working in this field for, I don't know, 20 something years. But my most important role is being a mom. I have 4 kiddos, and all of them have had IEPs and have been able to be educated through the Head Start Early Intervention program. And that has been a great thing in their lives. And I'm so grateful to the staff there for all that they have done for my kids. I have kids that have been impacted by trauma. I have a son that was adopted at age 5 from Romania, from an orphanage. And so you can imagine that he has experienced trauma in his life. So I have a little bit of experience and I love my job. This is my passion and I'm really excited to present to you today. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about exactly what trauma is. And we at the Attachment and Trauma Network, where I work, we like to use this definition from Dr. Bruce Perry, who heads up the Child Trauma Academy. Trauma is a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of usual human experience. Trauma often involves intense fear, terror, and helplessness. And as we think about the kiddos that you guys work with, the big thing here is the helplessness, because these children are at a very young age and they really depend on adults to help them and guide them. And so they are helpless. And so when there is a psychologically distressing event that is completely outside the range of their experience, that involves intense helplessness, they are more vulnerable and experience that fear and terror. So we're going to get in a little more into that as we go along here. But the great news, because trauma can be a very depressing topic, is that it's really important for you to know that trauma changes brains. That's what we're going to talk about today, how trauma changes brains and affects these children's brains. But what I want you to remember and to focus on and to know is that we can change brains too. I'm going to teach you how. I'm going to give you an overview and give you some information on how we do that so that we can combat the effects of trauma on the brain. We're going to start off with a little bit of neuroscience. I don't want you to be scared about that, because if I can learn a little bit of neuroscience, anybody can. So brain basic number 1 is that the brain develops from the bottom up and the inside out. What that means is that this little baby on the left here, he is dressed like a banker, but there's no such thing as baby bankers. Babies don't come out of the womb ready to issue a loan for you. They're not capable of doing that. No one expects them to do that. And children cannot do more than their brains are ready for. We will talk more about that as we discuss chronological age versus developmental age. It really is important for us to have appropriate expectations. Sometimes we expect children to do more than they're able to do. And when it comes to children who have been traumatized, their developmental age is much younger than their chronological age. So as parents, when I teach parents, we talk about that you need to parent your child at their developmental age, not their chronological age. I mentioned my son who was adopted, and for example, at age 8, he needed to be parented at like a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old. He was not developed developmentally in a way that matched his chronological age. And so that can be true as educators too, that you're going to teach and work with a child at their developmental age, not their chronological age. So typically, if you're working with a 3 or 4-year-old, even maybe younger than that, you know, a 2-year-old, you'll want to teach them and come to them and meet them at their level at like an 18-month-old, maybe a 2-year-old if you're working with a 4-year-old, and go from there. That can be changed and modified, but generally that's what I'm talking about, is teaching them and working with them at a younger age. So I also, at this brain tenant, want to kind of reinforce the idea that babies don't have language or executive functioning or critical thinking skills. You can't reason with an infant. You can only get them to calm down and regulate them by soothing them. You know, you just can't talk them out of that. We all know that, right? But that is true a lot of times for children who are traumatized and have, you know, are 2, 3, 4 years old. You're going to regulate them and soothe them and calm them at that baby age in order for them to get that, you know, prefrontal cortex online. And we'll talk a little bit about more of that as we go along here. Brain basic number 2 is use it or lose it. So when we talk about this one, I want you to keep in mind, these are pruning shears over here. So what that means is that if what we use gets strengthened and what we don't use, you know, weakens and gets pruned away, that's called pruning. So, you know, like if you go to the gym and you work on your biceps every day, they get really strong, but then your legs don't get strong, they get really weak. So we have to kind of use all the different parts of our brain. And when it comes to kids, how we can relate this to kids with trauma is that children who have been neglected have brains that are very underactivated. If you would do an MRI or a CAT scan, you would see, you know, differences in what is firing and what is not firing in a child's brain who has been neglected. It's harder to build new pathways rather than strengthen what's already there. And so children of abuse or other maltreatment, they have brains that are ready to react to that maltreatment, even when there's no danger in sight. I want you to kind of hear that, because when a child is triggered by something, a sight, a sound, a smell, whatever it is, a lot of times we don't know, but a negative behavior comes out and we're like, whoa, where did that come from? It's often because, you know, they were triggered and their brains are wired in a way that they automatically react. That pathway, that neural pathway has been built and it's really strengthened. So it kind of becomes their go-to reaction. You may have seen this in kids that are biters or spitters. You know, that's just their go-to. It's been strengthened. And so it just becomes that habit. And that amygdala in the brain, it just becomes an expert. It grows really big and strong. And the stress chemicals that it releases in the brain are corrosive to the brain's development over time. So, you know, one part gets really strong and the other kind of gets pruned away. And that's what I mean when I talk about it becoming the child's norm, because it's how the baby experiences or the child experiences the world. And traumatized children have a hard time understanding a world that is not chaotic or negative. So have you known people or children that you feel like they just always live in that world and you don't understand why? Because it's not the most pleasant or easiest way, but in their mind it really actually is, because that is what they know, that is how they are wired, and that part of their brain has become really strengthened. And so they approach everything from a fear-based expectation. They're just planning on being hurt. And, you know, they've grown up with mistrust in their lives, and that's the part of the brain that's really strong. So we're going to teach you how to rewire that, but it's important for you to kind of understand that. Brain basic number 3 is that what fires together wires together. So what you use in your brain gets hardwired. Here's an example. So let's think about driving a car. You know, we all drive a car, and when you get into that car, you don't think, how do I turn the car on? And how do I back up? And how do I steer it? We don't even think about that stuff. It's just automatic. Your brain's created the neural pathways for how to drive that car over time. And you learned how, you know, as you learned how to drive. And so it's just become automatic for you, kind of like muscle memory. If you get into a different car, you might have to kind of consciously think of a certain steps a few times, but it just all gets bundled together to make your brain more efficient. And so if you think about our kids and their early experiences, I want you to think about what got bundled up together. Certain smells, sounds, and relationships got bundled up together in a negative pattern. And I'm talking about these kids that have experienced trauma. So a common one that moms let me back up. A common one for children of neglect is that their mom or their primary caretaker was unsafe because they didn't, you know, protect and possibly even abandoned their child. So that automatic overreaction to caregivers is hardwired for many kids. So, you know, you may have a child that you're just not able to connect to in class, or they just don't relate to you in some way, and it's not personal. It certainly feels that way, but they are just hardwired because of maybe what happened in their early life. And so on this slide, it talks about chaos and calm. And what I want you to know is that you can, these kids, what I'm saying is that a lot of these kids who have experienced trauma are wired for chaos. You know, they have lived in chaos for so long that that's all they know. And their chaos can become contagious. You may have noticed that in a classroom, that when this one particular child flips their lid or goes off, that kind of it sets off the rest of the class. It can set off the teacher for sure. And then, you know, we're just in this negative pattern. But what I want you to know is that calm is also contagious, and we can wire the calm and get that hardwired. And we have to teach that. We have to model that. I'm going to, you know, teach you how, but that's really important to know how our brain, you know, fires and wires so that we can really wire the calm and get that hardwired and lessen the chaos. All right, brain basic number 4. I think you all know this. It's called neuroplasticity. Our brains are plastic. We can change them. And we used to think that happened at, you know, only a very young age, but we know now that happens well into adulthood. We can continue to change our brains. And so that's really awesome and hopeful. And we're going to talk about that. All right. I don't know if I've got time for this today. So I may send you a video of me teaching this to another class. I probably will do that because it takes a while to do this, and I don't think I've got enough time. But Dr. Dan Siegel teaches this hand and brain model, and it is awesome. And it's something to teach kids in the class so that you can give them language and an ability to kind of express their feelings. Because remember that baby banker I talked about? You know, he has to learn things, right? And he doesn't have language right now. And a lot of kids, you probably have noticed, are having big feelings, but they're not able to express them. And this is a way to teach them how to express them, and that you can connect with them and communicate with them. So I am going to attach a video of me talking about that, and can get that to you guys to follow up on. All right, really quickly, adverse childhood experiences. I hope that you're learning about them. I hope that you know all about them. We don't have time to go over them today. I usually spend a good hour just talking about this subject, but what's important for you to know is that we're seeing, you know, more and more adverse childhood experiences, and this impacts children in the classroom and through their life, and it impacts their health. I've attached right here some videos for you to watch, some great TED Talks by Nadine Burke Harris and others to really kind of help you, short videos that will help you learn more about ACEs. And I've made a packet for you that talks a lot about ACEs too, because it is critical to our work. So I'm brushing over it today, and I apologize for that, but a lot of good information, and I'm always happy to come back and train more on this subject and all of these that you may have questions on later. We'll just do a good overview today. All right, how does trauma impact learning? I have a great infographic that I've attached for you guys today if you want to pull it up and follow along right now, because childhood trauma affects everything, and it's going to definitely impact the classroom. 1 in 4 students have experienced childhood trauma, and so you're going to see this in the classroom. And I want you to be able to recognize it so that you can shift your thinking in how to handle it and respond rather than react to these kiddos. So let's go through each one. First, let's really briefly talk about the body. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. This is just a quick overview, but fight, flight, freeze reactions, you're going to see these in the classroom, and I want you to be able to go, ah, that's what that is. And now I know how to handle it, rather than, you know, being triggered yourself. You will see children that have sensory and motor challenges, unusual pain responses. Some kids have a really, because of their childhood trauma, they have a really high pain level. That's not normal. And then some, of course, are very sensitive, and even the smallest physical, injury to their body, even just a pinprick, would send them through the roof. So that's kind of what we see in the classroom when we talk about body responses. Okay, emotions, you're going to see, that hypervigilance where they're watching everything, being overly aware of everything, not being able to kind of concentrate and focus on one thing because they're concentrating and focusing on everything. High distress, self-regulation problems, which means they're not able to calm themselves when they're upset, and difficulty communicating and feeling their feelings and their needs, which, here we are talking about really young kiddos in your classroom. And so a lot of these can be kind of a chronological age thing, but I want you to kind of try to learn that, be able to pinpoint the difference when it's just outside of regular, normal experience. All right. Also dissociation, which we can talk about later, but being so spaced out and far gone from what's going on that they're really not even in the room. Let's go talk about actions and behaviors now. You will see a lot of poor impulse control in children that have experienced trauma. Their go-to is going to be a lot of times that anger and aggression and oppositional behavior. And hopefully not in these very young kids, the substance abuse and eating problems and self-harm. But I am seeing in my therapy practice kids younger and younger each year. And it's just a heartbreaking thing. So we don't also want to say that it doesn't impact children at this very young age. That's quite a myth that I've heard many myths about trauma, that it, because they're young, they'll get over it quicker, or it didn't impact them as much, or they won't remember. All those are myths. So I want you to, when a child has oppositional behavior, instead of saying, they're so manipulative or so oppositional, it's that, this is their survival skill, and they really cannot, without help and resources and support, curb that. So that's what we're talking about. Let's jump to the thinking. This is something I want you to watch for. If a child really needs a lot of guidance and has an absolute lack of curiosity, learning, processing problems, language development. And of course you guys will have children with IEPs. And so there is a difference, between a cognitive disability and a trauma, developmental trauma disorder, those kind of things. But it doesn't really necessarily matter. You're still going to help that child in the same way. We don't need to know all the details of what happened to the child. We just need to know how to respond to the child. So when you're seeing these things, difficulty regulating attention, executive functioning and all that, there are ways to respond and help the child. I did also attach in your packet some great articles on executive functioning issues and all of that. So hopefully after this, because I'm just throwing a ton of information at you really quick and probably, filling your brains up too early in the morning, but things that you can follow up on and digest slowly. All right, let's jump to self-concept. We are seeing children even younger than we anticipated or had in the past with low self-esteem and lots of shame. So watch for that. And I just want you to see these kids in a different light. I think before we really saw them in a light that they won't do what we ask and they, are manipulating. And I'm really wanting to shift that paradigm for you today and help you to understand that their brains have been negatively impacted and wired in a negative way. And this is how it's coming out. And this is what we're seeing. And I'm going to, then follow that up with ways that you can help these kiddos. All right, let's move to relationships. These kids come with a lot of mistrust. I mean, a lot of them clingy or withdrawn. You'll see quite opposite ends of the spectrum. And I'm sure you've seen the kids that are the teacher pleasers and overly helpful. It's because of their, lack of control and complete desperation of helping themselves but not knowing how. And that lack of empathy, which can be kind of scary, but we can teach and we can help through. And then the last one I just want to briefly touch on is that there are kids who seem perfectly fine, that you just don't even think you need to worry about them. But a lot of times those are the ones you really need to worry about, because some kiddos, don't show any signs at school, but they may be keeping it all together so that when they get home, that's where the difficulties arise. So when you hear a parent talk about how they're not okay at home and you're like, but they're fine at school, listen to that parent. Something really could be going on. All right, let's move on. I want to go through this and get a little bit more into, how trauma impacts learning. We're going to go through that fight, flight, freeze. And so you know what fight looks like. You've seen it. And that one's pretty easy to define, argumentative, stubborn, challenging. And then the flight is a little more, obviously when a child runs out of the classroom, that's flight, but it can also be that they are distracted or seeking attention. And then the freeze. This one I see most common from children who have experienced trauma. And this one is where I see kids getting mislabeled and misdiagnosed and really misunderstood. So I want you to just kind of take a minute and think about those kids who maybe you have called lazy, who seem to daydream. You don't feel like they try. You don't think they care. They don't apply themselves. They're constantly staring off. This is a freeze response, and this is very common in children who have experienced trauma. This is how their brains have become wired and how they're coping with it. So I'm hoping that you're starting to maybe see them in a different light and not label them as lazy, not caring, not trying, but as a vulnerable, traumatized child who needs help to heal. All right, let's move on. A trauma-sensitive school, yeah. Okay, trauma-sensitive school is one in which all students feel safe, welcome, and supported. And that is our goal at the Attachment Trauma Network, is to have schools become trauma-sensitive where children feel safe. And when we do that by realizing the prevalence of trauma, and we just really skimmed over ACEs, but truly, in order for you to understand the prevalence of trauma, I do want you to read up on ACEs and watch those videos, because the numbers are shockingly high. And we have to realize that in order to kind of attack it and combat it. And then I'm kind of trying to help you recognize that impact of trauma and the impact that it has on learning and behavior. I really want to talk about how it impacts behavior. And we'll talk about can't versus won't and that paradigm shift when we get to that spot. I'm going to teach you how to respond in a trauma-informed way. And of course, we want to resist traumatization. And what I mean by that is that children in a school come in contact with way more than the teacher. They come in contact with the bus driver and the lunch lady and whoever's manning the recess and the janitor and everyone who is in that school. And there are so many in that school. And so preferably when we train, we want to train the whole staff, not just the teacher, because that child needs to be responded to in a trauma-informed way by everyone. That's the goal. It takes a long time. Some of the schools I've been working with, we are on year 3 of me going in and spending, 3 days talking to all of the staff. And so, what I can do here in 45 minutes is just give you a really good overview where you can let it start to sink in and start writing down all your questions, and then we can go from there. All right. Here is some awesome news too, because I think sometimes teachers, well, I think all the time, teachers are asked to do so much and it's overwhelming. And I don't want you to feel like it's just one more thing that you've got to do. That's the last thing I want you to feel like. I want you to know that trauma-sensitive schools help all children. So this is not something that you're just going to do for that one child who you know is in foster care. This is something you're going to bring into the whole classroom, and it's going to help everybody. And it'll just become a habit. It'll just become, what fires together, wires together. You're just going to start to respond in this trauma-sensitive way to every child, and you will see an amazing change in your classroom environment. So trauma-sensitive schools help everybody. You don't just need to stop and think, what do I need to do for this one child? You just are able to do it for everybody. And so how do we do that? The very first thing is to feel safe. I want you to look at these I've got parenting cards and I've got teacher cards, and I usually do the parent training, and so that's my lingo. But today we're talking to the teachers, and so these are the teacher cards, and I've got some if you want some. But it's feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and learn. Now, typically, if you're talking about a classroom environment, maybe the very first tenet of your classroom is to learn, right? Academics are the reason we go to school. But in a trauma-sensitive school, learning is the last thing. And it doesn't mean that it's lower on the priority. What it means is that a child cannot learn until they feel safe, they are connected, they are regulated, and then, only then, can they learn. And so I have attached for you an awesome infographic. I worked really hard on it last year, and I'm really proud of it. And it's trauma-informed teaching / parenting in our new online environment. And I made this for teachers who had to start, teaching online. That was a new thing last year. And then we had parents who suddenly had to help their children all the time at home and in that new online environment. So these were ways to create that sensitive, trauma-sensitive school in the home and for teachers in that online environment. So feel safe, be connected, get regulated, and learn. I say it so much and teach it so much that it's just, I don't even have to think about it. I love it. So I hope that you get that way too. And so the very first thing is feel safe. Feeling safe is non-negotiable. There are 2 safeties I'm talking about here. Everyone must feel safe. Everyone must be safe. That physical safety is non-negotiable, right? There has to be safety. But the second one I'm talking about is feeling safe. It's called felt safety. So even though I know that you have worked hard to create a safe environment in that classroom, A child may come in and not feel safe. That's not your fault. That is because of the child's history and whatever has gone on. And so we are going to work really hard throughout the year to build that trust and connection and regulation so that that child feels safe. Because if they cannot feel safe, then they cannot learn. So it's something that we do, and I'm going to teach you how to, create that felt safety as we go along here. And there's lots of great ways to do it. So you can do that just by validation, communicating with the students and the parents together, and keeping instructions really simple, which I think for you guys in the population that you serve, that's just something that comes natural to you. We're not teaching calculus. Thank heavens I'm not, because nobody would learn that. But creating that environment where you're just making instructions simple and assignments simple and chunking things down, meeting the child where they're at and keeping your expectations intact. All right, let's jump to be connected. So this is really important. We as human beings are wired to connect. We come out of that womb completely dependent on adults. Excuse me, we cannot survive without someone taking care of us. That connection is so critical to the attachment cycle. And I will do webinars sometimes where I just spend the whole time talking about the attachment cycle. We don't have time for that today, but it's important for you to know that that connection, that need for connection continues. And that's tricky now in our environment where children and teachers are wearing masks and we're not able to touch the way we used to. So we have to try extra hard to keep that connection strong. I want you to hear this. We are wired to connect. So I want you to remember that those children need you. They need to see your eyes. They need to see your smile. They need to feel your presence and understand that you are there for them, that you see them, you hear them, you are connected to them, and they can, depend on you. All right, let's move to get regulated. This is another one that I can spend hours and hours on, and I wish I had time to. One thing I really need you to know is that, let's talk about what regulation is. It's that peace and calm, and you've felt that in your rooms when everything's going well, everybody's emotions are regulated. And then of course you have felt that dysregulation, right? There's quite a difference. And when a child gets dysregulated in a classroom, it can dysregulate other children and the teacher. But I want you as the teacher or the helper or whatever your role is as the adult in that classroom to remain as regulated as possible and mirror that and model that and be that example. And I promise you that will be contagious. The dysregulation will become contagious, or the regulation will become contagious. So it's important as soon as dysregulation occurs in the classroom for you as the teacher to be regulated, to model that with the volume, tone, and cadence of your voice. I'm modeling it for you right now as I talk, really quiet, slow, clear, and calm. I am feeling really calm right now, and so hopefully you are feeling that as well. The confidence in my voice saying, it's okay, we've got this. I know that you're stressed. I know you're having a tough time. No worries, I've got your back. I'm here for you. I'll teach you regulation tools as we move along down the line here, but there's a lot that you can do to help a child get regulated, but the best thing you can do is stay regulated yourself. And I know teachers hate me to say this, but it's true, and I'm going to keep preaching it, and it's self-care. You cannot be regulated, and you cannot help others, and you cannot, pour into a child's cup unless your pitcher is full. And so you've got to take care of yourselves and take breaks and make sure you're doing okay, because if you're not okay, the children in the classroom will not be okay, and that will be contagious. So I want you to stay regulated. And then lastly, once we've got all those pieces in place, and this is a continuum, some days are better than others, right? And we're going to make a lot of mistakes. I think it's important to make mistakes because then you can model repair. And that's a really important thing for a child to learn. So Don't stress about making mistakes. Go ahead and make mistakes and then apologize for them. That's the best thing you can teach a child, is how to fix their mistakes. So once we, are in a good spot, then the kids can learn. And I, that prefrontal, or excuse me, that hand and brain model that I briefly touched on, I want you to watch that video where I teach it so you can teach it as well, because it talks about how when your lids are flipped, then your prefrontal cortex isn't online, and you need that prefrontal cortex online in order to learn. So it's really important to, you can't have that prefrontal cortex online unless you're regulated and the child feels safe. So learning just cannot happen until all those things are in place. Okay, let's move on. We've talked about this little paradigm shift I've been hinting at. It's so important for us to, instead of asking what's wrong with you, somebody's having a breakdown in the room, screaming, crying, hitting, throwing chairs, whatever it is, instead of saying out loud or thinking in our minds, what is wrong with you? We really need to be thinking, what happened? What is going on underneath this behavior that is causing this reaction? Most of the time, it's fear. It's needs not being met in some way or another, and it's anger. And so if we can look at that child and think, buddy, what happened? And what's in your way? And how can I help you? Then that changes everything. It makes you, allies rather than, on opposite sides. So the child is going to have a behavior response, right? And they're going to, they're trying to communicate whatever they're missing or needing, and you're going to respond by helping them feel safe, calming them down, finding out what they need, what's in the way, listening to them. That's going to create that connection. And then once everybody's calm, you can have that talk about, all right, what happened and how can we help it so that it doesn't happen again? And this is something you guys do every day. You're actually amazing experts at it, but maybe you haven't looked at it through this lens before. So when we talk about, that paradigm shift and that change, it's looking at the child as, that they need to heal, that something happened, rather than they're broken or bad or needing to be fixed. And that we really look at their behavior as communication. They're trying to communicate something. A 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old is not going to come up to you and say, I had a really bad night. Mom and dad got in a fight. It really scared me. Then I had nightmares. And that's why I'm really grumpy today and not paying attention. That's just not going to happen. But what is going to happen is that you're going to say, okay, buddy, time for circle, and they don't do it, and whatever that behavior is that you're like, gosh, what happened? All I did was mention that it was circle time, but they weren't able to do circle time. And so if you can kind of be a detective and figure out, what are they trying to tell me? Something's wrong. This is not normal. Then you can respond in a different way. And it's just really important for you. And that's why I spent quite a bit of time at the early part of this webinar talking about brain basics and that neurobiology. It's really important for you to know that neurologically, that child is reacting. There's something going on in the brain that has caused the child to react that way. It is not that the child is willfully manipulating and not wanting to go to circle time. It's that something is happening in their brain and we need to help them. So what can we change for them? Rather than, listen, Johnny, it's circle time. You have no choice. Go to circle right now or else. Rather than, okay, I can tell that right now, Johnny, you're not wanting to go to circle. Do you want to talk about it? Do you need to go get a drink of water? Would you like to go to the bathroom? Change that scenery a little bit. Do you need to do some deep breathing? Those are those regulation tools, and we'll talk about those a little bit more specifically. All the things that you can do to help Johnny be able to come to circle time. And maybe today He's not going to go to circle time. It's not the end of the world if he doesn't. All right, but the big thing is to take that focus off of the behavior. We don't want to shame him and, you know, dysregulate the whole room. We want to take the focus off the behavior and focus on something's going on that he's not able to meet our expectations, and let's change our expectations rather than trying to change him. All right, we can put the focus on solving problems together. If Johnny knows that you're there for him and you've got his back and you can hold space for him in this moment and you can solve the problem together rather than, you know, him trying to fix it himself, which he can't, he really is not able to, then that will build that trust and that relationship and that connection, and it'll pay off major, major dividends. All right, did we talk about can't versus won't? Let's go to the next one. I think that's where we're going to get to it. We've talked a little bit about that behavior as communication. And I really want to just spend a second on can't versus won't, because I hear this all the time. I think we were just taught this all our lives, and it's just become wired, and I want to rewire it. I want us to shift our speech and our thinking when we talk about a child and we're asking a child to do something, and instead of us saying they won't do it, I want us to realize that they cannot do it. So can't versus won't. I really want that to be an important shift in our paradigm, that we realize neurologically, emotionally, physically, in this moment, this child cannot do what we are asking them to do. And sometimes we know why, but most of the time we don't know why. And so we just have to understand that and give them that space and hold that moment for them in a way that is safe, so that they understand that we understand they can't in this moment and that they will be able to later. So, all right, moving on from that, I want to talk about the behavior at home being different than the behavior at school. I want you to watch for that and notice, you know, be a detective and try to figure that out. All right, this is where you can kind of start recording the observations, collecting data, and identifying. This is where you're playing detective and figuring out, sorry, I apologize. You can tell I'm distracted. I got a text from the doctor. All right, moving on. Let's go back to what I was saying here. I apologize. That if you start kind of recording and observing and noticing that every Thursday at 9 a.m., Johnny does not want to come to circle time, then you might be able to kind of figure out what's going on at home Thursdays. Thursdays might be the day that dad picks him up versus mom, or drops him off, and just notice, you know, patterns and then you can kind of hit that head on. It just makes such a difference if you can start being that detective and recognizing patterns and figuring things out. And of course, we just want to avoid labels and understand that these kids aren't bad. They've gone through something. And same with the parents. Typically, when we talk about ACEs, it's because parents typically have gone through a lot themselves, and that's what's going on with them, but they get mislabeled as bad parents. And of course, no bad teachers. We just want to all work together as a team. All right. So I've kind of built up how, you know, all these things. I want to get to how we move on from this and what we do. And we've talked about that, we talked about my brain today. We talked about, connection. See, I just made a mistake and I apologize for it, and I modeled that, and I'm doing that for your benefit, right? All right, relationship. So we definitely want to create that connection. And there's something called the PACE model. We don't have time to go through it today, but it talks about being playful and curious and empathetic. What is the A for? I just forgot what the A was for in PACE. Anyway, the curiosity is really something that kids thrive on when you get curious with them and really want to know about them, it really creates some strong connection, and it really helps you figure out what's going on with them. And I have probably said several times, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about, is the volume, tone, and cadence. If you raise your voice at a child, you'll lose them. It just doesn't solve the problem. It puts them into that fight, flight, freeze. It triggers the amygdala. So watch your volume, tone, and cadence, and make eye contact. Take your time with them. I've talked about not taking it personally, and practicing. I talked about the model and repair, and all that reciprocity. Okay, let's go on to regulation, because this is so important, guys. Calming activities. I hope that you all have calm rooms, calm kits, calm boxes, things, like coloring, deep breathing, pinwheels, Play-Doh, those things that calm the brain. Those are so important to regulation. And if you do it together and model it, then you can co-regulate the child. If they're having trouble calming down, you calm them down, whether it be through actually modeling it for them, or just sitting by their side and holding that space for them. Sensory and movement. I'm sure that you've got kiddos in your class that have sensory integration disorder. And you'll notice that some are hypersensitive versus hypo, that some, it really helps to have the vests, the heavy vests, or the weighted blankets. But movement is so critical. So take lots of physical breaks. And you have to kind of be implicit in your teaching and teaching these kiddos what to do during their breaks. A lot of these kiddos aren't going to be able to understand free play or be able to know for themselves. You need to model that for them and play with them alongside of them. And when it talks about flipping the lid, it's back to that hand-brain model. Flipping the lid just means that instead of being calm and regulated, you are in fight, flight, freeze. And we want to get these kids out of fight, flight, freeze, back into having that prefrontal cortex online. Now, in your packet, there is a model of the brain, and it shows all the things that prefrontal cortex does. And if you'll notice things like logic and reasoning, comprehension, memory, that is so important to understand, because when we ask a child to do what they did yesterday, remember what we talked about, understand, they can only do those things if their prefrontal cortex is online and they are not in fight, flight, or freeze. So if a child is having a breakdown and in fight, flight, or freeze, then you can't talk to them. You can't reason with them. You can't have them remember what to do. You have to calm them down first before. That's why, talking to the child, you can't really do that until they're calm. So plan with that student what to do when they start to flip their lid. Means being proactive, like, oh, Johnny, I can tell that you're starting to get a little frustrated. So let's stop. Let's take a break. Let's do some deep breathing. I hope you guys all know deep dragon breathing, rose and candle breathing, volcanic breathing, box breathing. There are so many fun ways to deep breathe and to teach the kids. And so you can get to the point where you can tell that he's about to flip his lid. You can stop and say, hey, bud, let's do some dragon breathing. And you can get way ahead of the game before he flips out. All right, so those are just a little bit of regulation tools. I've got a million of them and would be happy to share those with you and model some of those with you in the future if you have any questions. Okay, I'm just gonna rush through this quick because we've talked about safety. You've got to build that trust with these kids, collaborate together, give them control and choice. This is where a lot of kids spin out of control, is when they don't have control. Children who have experienced trauma very often are desperately seeking control. And so you can give them control in safe ways, like choices. Do you want the red ball or the green ball? too many choices is too many choices. So one or two, very simple. And then when it comes to praise, you just really want to praise what they did, not who they are, because kids that have trauma are filled with shame, and they have a really hard time accepting praise. It is so hard for them, and it just kind of creates mistrust. And so if you can praise what they did specifically, that will go a long way to build trust. Okay. So if this is not always possible, but if possible, if you can modify lighting, seating, and sounds for kids, you know those kids that are really sensitive to sounds and lighting. If you can modify that for them, you'll get more out of them, really. It will help, and it will help all the kids. I know that sometimes it feels like when you are doing something for one child that it might not be fair, but actually it models empathy and it helps everybody in the classroom because it increases the regulation in the classroom and teaches those other kids that we do care for others and we can help others. Keep the physical, changes. If you can move as much as possible, that will really help kids too. They really need to constantly be on the move. And then this talks about that children who come from trauma are not able to really, structure and routine is everything to them. When I teach parents, we spend a lot of time talking about how structure and routine really creates, safety and trust. It does in the classroom too, and classrooms are awesome at structure and routine. I mean, education and teachers are so good at 9:01 we do this, at 9:02 we do this. It's just an awesome thing. So that creates a lot of safety, so keep that up. But what I'm saying is if there is free time, sometimes that's really hard on the kids. So sometimes you've really got to even structure the free time, if that makes sense. Today, why don't you play with puppets during your free time? So consistency, we all understand that, and I really want you to understand the role of shame. If you haven't dove into Brene Brown's work, I encourage you to do that. It is so good and so life-changing. And then, of course, felt safety at all costs, because nothing else matters and nothing else happens unless that child feels safe. And I just want to, drive that home. If you can only remember one thing, it's that a child has to feel safe or nothing else happens. No progress can happen, and we cannot rewire the brain until that child feels safe. All right, really quickly, sticker charts, clip charts, level systems, all of that kind of stuff does not work. It just triggers a child, puts them into fight, flight, or freeze, and it just increases the shame a millionfold, because it just sets kids up for failure. Because remember, a child they cannot meet that expectation. And so our expectations are off if we are, expecting them to meet a mark and get a sticker, because it requires self-regulation. And remember, these kids, they don't have that skill yet. Keep thinking of that baby banker. That's what these kids are. They are younger than their chronological age. They're not there yet. They cannot self-regulate. They cannot do all the things we're asking them to do. And that just makes them feel shameful when they can't meet those goals. Same thing, won't versus can't. And it doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't address what's going on. Not going to circle time isn't that child wants to be able to do that, but can't. And so it doesn't fix what's going on. And so that's where we need to be a detective and figure it out and please avoid those behavior modification systems. So what does work? Well, remember we talked about planning ahead. When we know this child gets triggered and isn't going to meet our expectations, what do we do? What's the plan? There's got to be a safe place. And not that the child needs to be taken out. If they do need to be taken out, how do they come back in? We always need to focus on how to get them back in so that it's not a punishment. the best thing that we can do for those behaviors is to connect and co-regulate. Structure and routine is everything, and you guys do a good job of that, I know. And I had mentioned earlier, everybody needs to be on the same page. So if things need to be trained on the bus differently, then we need to train on the bus differently. If that bus is completely dysregulated and people are yelling and it's not safe, then it's going to overflow into the classroom. So everybody on the same page. And I've talked about this a lot too. Modeling, repair, and apology. All right, this is where we end, guys. We end with a ton of hope, and it's about building resilience. So the single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. We hope that all of our kids have supportive parents. Most of them do, a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't. And so hopefully there is one positive adult in that child's life, and that can be you. And that oftentimes is you, that supportive, stable, committed adult. And just by being that person, you can help that child build resilience. And I don't want that to feel heavy or overwhelming or a lot of pressure. It's just a lot of hope. That's all it is. And a lot of times it just means that you're there physically and looking that child in the eyes and being there for them so that they know that you've created that safe environment so they know that you are there. And if you haven't had a chance to look on Harvard Center for the Developing Child, their website, it is fantastic. It is a great resource. So I highly encourage you to go there and look for resources. They have like these awesome 5-minute videos that are just teach, social emotional learning curriculum that are so good. All right, here's where we end with resources too. I have a million resources to give you guys. I tried to break it down into some of these. I've also got some books I want to recommend to you. I attached some things in your packet. I know this was fast and furious and crazy, so I hope that you got a lot out of it. But the big thing I want you to know is that I'm here. So you can email me anytime. I can come down for more trainings if you'd like. But I think that was our last slide. I just want to express my gratitude for you letting me speak, especially under these horrible circumstances of me not being able to come. I'm really sad that I'm not there, but I can be there for you in the future. And thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'll go, let's see, I don't know if I can go back to my original slide, but it's ginger@attachedtrauma.org. And again, thank you for your time.